All right. The last thing we want to take a look at this week is some of the properties and methods that we can utilize with strings. String variables are actually a class in and of themselves. Classes are a little bit different than other data. They're actually objects that can hold a lot of different types of data. Because they're a class, there are properties we can access, and there are methods that we can utilize with them. Okay, so we're going to look how that applies, and we're going to take a look at a for next loop along with that to see how we can utilize those two things together to do some things that are kind of pretty useful with strings. So once again, I just have a pretty simple form here. I just got a single form with a label, really. In a load event here, I'm going to put up an input box that asks the user to put their name in. It just has the same text property as the main form. And then once that name gets put in there, one thing that I'm doing, I'll just jump down here to the easy part. One thing that I'm doing is I'm taking that name and I'm going to use a method with that name to display whatever text gets put in there into this label on the form. One method that you can use here is I can take string name and say dot to upper. That accesses the to upper method and changes all the character in that string to uppercase. So if I go in here and run this input box pops up. If I put in Mr. Zettler like that and say OK, what it's going to do, it's actually I got a couple things going on here. I didn't explain this yet. I got my message boxes cycling through here showing me all of the letters that I typed in. I'll explain how that's doing that here in a second. And then in the end though, that's the one thing I did explain is where I didn't type it in that way, but it changed it to upper right here and put it into the label. Okay? Now, the other thing that was going on there, where you saw each of the characters I put in, that was happening because of this for next loop right here. Okay. Another thing that you should understand about string class variables is that because they're this object, every character in there gets indexed, okay? And indexing is just counting, but index counting starts at 0 and then works its way up to the end there, right? So what I did here is I set up a for next loop, and the counter in my loop I just called int index because I want it to be the index positions of the words that the user types into the input box here, okay? Now I'm going to have my loop run, the start position is going to be 0 because index counting starts at 0, so I'm going to start this at 0, and then the ending is maybe looks a little weird here. What I'm actually doing is accessing another property of this string class variable, and that is dot length. So whatever length, I want this loop to run from index position 0 until it gets to the very last index position of string name. Now you'll notice I had to put string name dot length -1 here. The reason I did that is the length property of a variable is always going to be one more than the last index position because indexing starts at 0 and counts its way up, and length just says, hey, there's this many characters. So like if I put in my name Paul, the length property of that would be 4, but the letter P would be in the 0 position, A would be in the 1 position, U would be in the 2 position, and L would be in the 3 position. So if I'm going through this based on index positions, I have to say string.length -1 so that I finish at the last letter. If I just put string name.length in there without the -1, this loop would try to run one more time then there were actually characters, and it would throw an error message because there wouldn't be an index position at that. So don't get confused here. This is not a stepping thing. I didn't put step in here. If I put step and then I would work my way down in counting, but I put string name dot length -1. So in other words, whatever the length property is of this, subtract 1. That's how many times I want my loop to run up till it gets to that number. Okay, and then inside of this for next loop, what I did was I just put up a message box, right? Here again, it's got the same text property as the main form, but then I did another thing right in here, right? I said string name dot chars dot int index. So now what dot chars does here, it accesses the properties of the string variable. What it does is it pulls out the character that's at whatever index position you put in here, okay, in string name. So the first time this loop runs, my index position is 0. So that's 0 gets put in here. 0 right here, right? And so it's going to pull out the character that's at the 0 position in string name. And that's going to get displayed in the message box. Then the next loop comes down here. The next time this for next loop runs, int index is going to be 1. So the next time the loop runs, it's 1. And 1 is in here. So it's going to pull out the character that's at the 1 position. Okay, and that's what we were seeing here. So I'll just run it again real quick. If I just, like I said, if I put in my first name there like that, click OK. So P was in the 0 position. Click OK. A is in the 1 position. U is in the 2 position. L is in the 3 position, and that's the last. That string name.length -1 is going to be 3 for that. So when I click OK, it's done. And then the last thing here is it converts that string name all to upper and puts it into the label. Okay, so I'm utilizing a for next loop. I've really got control of this loop here. It's only going to run the number of times that there are characters in the string. And then I was doing some other things with it, pulling out characters, doing stuff like this. Now, this has huge implications as far as searching for something. Okay, if I wanted to search for a particular letter in a string, I would use this same kind of concept. Now, certainly my code in here would be different, right? I'd have the same kind of thing set up in the middle here, or where I have a for next loop where I'm running through the index positions in some string, but then in the middle I would probably, if search text, I'd basically have a character variable, maybe called search text or something like that, that the user would give me. Maybe I'd have another input box pop up where the user put in a letter, and then I would say if that search letter equaled the character that was at the index position, then we either show it to them in a label, or if we're counting how many times a letter were in something, we could add to a counter. All that stuff could happen inside of this for next loop. Okay, so there's a lot of implications here with these string class properties and methods. There's a lot more of them than what we're talking about here, but I just mentioned a couple this week to kind of get us started, and our programs, we're kind of practicing utilizing that a little bit. Hopefully you can take what I've shown you here and figure out how to do the little letter counting program that we're trying to, and then we'll go from there and learn some others.